My name is Milton Friedman. I passed away in 2006, but if I were alive today, in 2026, at 113 years old, I'd be watching the world's governments repeat the same monetary disasters I warned about for 7 decades. And I'd be more convinced than ever that most people, including most politicians and many economists, still don't understand the most fundamental truth about economics. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. I first said those words in India in 1963. People thought I was being overly simplistic. The Keynesian establishment laughed. They said inflation was caused by labor unions pushing wages higher, by oil companies raising prices, by supply chain disruptions, by corporate greed, by everything except the one thing that actually causes it, the printing press. And here we are in 2026, and they're still getting it wrong, still blaming everything except money, still wondering why their solutions never work, still surprised when countries that follow my advice, like Argentina just did, go from 300% inflation to 13% inflation in 2 years. Let me tell you something that will shock you. Every time you hear someone blame inflation on supply chains, on Putin, on corporate price gouging, on workers demanding higher wages, they're either ignorant of basic economics or they're lying to you. And if they work for the government or the Federal Reserve, I can tell you which one it is. I spent my entire career, from the 1940s to the 2000s, studying money. I co-authored A Monetary History of the United States, 1867 to 1960, with Hannah Schwartz. We examined nearly a century of American economic data. We looked at every inflation, every deflation, every boom, every bust. And we found something that should terrify every person who holds dollars, euros, or any government-issued currency. There has never been a sustained inflation that was not preceded by sustained growth in the money supply. Never. Not once. Not in the United States, not in Germany, not in Zimbabwe, not anywhere ever. But let me start with something even more shocking. The reason your money loses value isn't complicated. It's arithmetic. Pure, simple arithmetic that a child can understand, but that central bankers pretend is beyond their comprehension. There's an equation. We call it the equation of exchange. MV equals PY. M is the money supply. V is velocity, how fast money changes hands. P is the price level. And Y is real output, the actual goods and services produced. This isn't theory. This isn't ideology. This is accounting. It's like saying 2 plus 2 equals 4. If you increase M, the money supply, faster than Y, real production of goods and services, then P, prices, must rise. It's mathematics, it's inevitable, it's inflation. I used to have a version of this equation on my California license plate. People thought it was a joke. It wasn't a joke. It was the most important economic truth anyone could learn. And here's what makes me angry, even from beyond the grave. The people running monetary policy today know this equation. They studied it in graduate school. They understand the mathematics perfectly, but they lie about it because the truth is politically inconvenient. The truth is this: when governments spend more money than they collect in taxes, they have 3 choices. They can raise taxes, which is unpopular, they can borrow money, which is limited, or they can print money, which is invisible to most people until it's too late. Guess which one they choose. Let me tell you what's been happening since I died in 2006. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet, the amount of money they've created out of thin air, has grown from $800 billion to over $8 trillion. That's a 1,000% increase in 20 years. The money supply has exploded, and somehow they act surprised that prices are rising. But here's where it gets criminal. They don't call it money printing anymore. They call it quantitative easing. They call it asset purchases. They call it providing liquidity to markets. Pretty words to hide an ugly truth. They're stealing your wealth through the printing press, and they're counting on you being too distracted or too confused to notice. Let me show you how this theft works. When I was born in 1912, a dollar bought roughly what $30 buys today. That means a dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power over my lifetime. Not because of supply chains, not because of corporate greed, because the government created 30 times more dollars. Your grandfather could buy a house for $3,000. That same house costs $300,000 today. Same house, same neighborhood, same materials, but 100 times more dollars chasing it. That's not housing inflation. That's monetary inflation expressing itself in housing prices. Your grandfather could buy a new car for $500. Today it costs $30,000. Same transportation, same function, but 60 times more dollars chasing it. That's not automotive inflation. That's monetary inflation expressing itself in car prices. Everything you think has gotten more expensive has actually stayed roughly the same price. What's changed is that dollars have become worth less, much, much less, and it's accelerating. But here's what makes the theft even more insidious. It doesn't affect everyone equally. When new money enters the economy, it doesn't magically appear in everyone's bank account simultaneously. It appears first in the accounts of those closest to the printing press: big banks, government contractors, financial institutions. These people get to spend the new money before prices have had time to adjust upward. They get the benefit. Then that money works its way through the economy, bidding up prices as it goes. By the time it reaches you, the teacher, the mechanic, the nurse, the small business owner, prices have already risen, but your salary hasn't. This is why the rich get richer during inflationary periods, while the middle class gets destroyed. It's not an accident. It's not market forces. It's a direct result of monetary policy that benefits those closest to the money printer at the expense of those farthest away. The economists have a term for this. They call it the Cantillon effect. Richard Cantillon figured this out in the 1700s. The people who get the new money first benefit. Everyone else pays the cost. So when you hear politicians talk about inflation hurting working families, just remember, they caused it. When you hear Federal Reserve officials express concern about rising prices, just remember, they printed the money that caused those prices to rise. When you hear about committees and task forces studying inflation, just remember, they know exactly what's causing it and exactly how to stop it. They just don't want to. Because stopping inflation requires stopping the printing. And stopping the printing requires either raising taxes, cutting spending, or both. And that's politically painful. So instead, they'll blame Russia. They'll blame supply chains. They'll blame you for wanting higher wages. They'll blame anyone and anything except the institution with the sole power to create money, themselves. Now let me tell you why this matters more in 2026 than it ever has before. Because what's happening now is different. It's more dangerous, and most people have no idea what's coming. For decades, America had a secret weapon against inflation. The dollar was the world's reserve currency. When we printed dollars, much of that money went overseas. Other countries needed dollars for international trade. Oil was priced in dollars. Major commodities were priced in dollars. So we could export our inflation to the rest of the world. It was a brilliant scam, and it worked for 50 years. We got the goods, they got the depreciating currency. But that's changing. Countries are starting to trade in their own currencies. They're creating alternatives to dollar-based payment systems. They're buying gold. They're moving away from the dollar. What happens when all those dollars come home? What happens when other countries no longer want to hold our depreciating currency? All that inflation we exported comes back all at once. That's when you'll see what real inflation looks like. And the response will be predictable. Politicians will declare a crisis. They'll implement price controls, which never work and always create shortages. They'll blame speculators, foreigners, businesses, anyone except themselves. They'll promise to fix the problem with more intervention, more controls, more of the same policies that caused the problem. But there is another way. There's always been another way. And a few countries are starting to figure it out. Look at Argentina today. For decades, they had chronic inflation, 50%, 100%, sometimes 300% per year. Their currency was worthless. Their economy was a disaster. But in 2023, they elected a president who actually understood monetary economics. What did he do? He stopped printing money. That's it. That's the whole secret. He eliminated the central bank's ability to monetize government debt. He cut government spending so they didn't need to print money to fund it. He removed currency controls so people could hold better money if they wanted to. And inflation collapsed from 300% to 13% in 2 years. The international economic establishment said it was impossible. The IMF said it would cause a depression. Keynesian economists said you needed gradual adjustment. They were all wrong. Just like they've been wrong about inflation for 60 years. But here's what I want you to understand. What Argentina did isn't complicated. It's not some brilliant innovation. It's economics 101. It's what any country could do if they had the political will. Stop printing money. That's the answer. That's always been the answer. That's the only answer. But let me tell you why they won't do it willingly. Because stopping the printing means governments have to live within their means. They have to choose between programs instead of funding everything through inflation. They have to tell voters the truth about the cost of government instead of hiding it through money creation. And that's politically difficult. Much easier to blame supply chains and hope people don't understand what's really happening. So what can you do? How can you protect yourself from this deliberate debasement of currency? First, understand that cash is not safe. Holding dollars or euros or yen in a savings account paying 2% when inflation is 5% means you're losing 3% per year, guaranteed. That's not investing. That's slow-motion wealth destruction. Second, hold real assets, things that maintain their value as currencies depreciate. I'm not talking about speculation. I'm not talking about get-rich-quick schemes. I'm talking about stores of value that have worked for centuries. Gold, for example. For 5,000 years, gold has maintained its purchasing power while every paper currency has eventually gone to zero. In 1920, an ounce of gold bought a good suit. Today, an ounce of gold still buys a good suit. Same purchasing power. That's what real money looks like. Real estate in good locations. Population isn't growing, but money supply is. More dollars chasing the same amount of land means higher land prices. Not because land is getting more valuable, but because dollars are becoming worth less. Productive businesses, companies that create real value, that generate real cash flows, that can raise prices along with inflation. When you own shares in a wonderful business, you own a piece of something real. When the currency loses value, the business can charge more for its products. But here's the most important thing, and this is where most people get it wrong. Don't try to time the market. Don't try to predict when inflation will accelerate or when it will slow down. Central banks are better at hiding their manipulation than they used to be. The effects can be delayed for years. Instead, position yourself for the long-term trend. And the long-term trend is clear. As long as governments spend more than they collect, and as long as central banks enable that spending through money creation, currencies will lose value. That's not a prediction. That's arithmetic. The only question is how fast. Some years it's 2%. Some years it's 5%. Some years it's 20%. But the direction is always the same. Down. Always down. And here's something that will horrify you. The government statistics that claim inflation is only 2% or 3%, they're calculated using methodologies specifically designed to understate the real number. They exclude food and energy. You know, the things you actually buy. They use something called hedonic adjustments. If a computer gets faster, they count that as a price decrease, even if it costs more. They use substitution. If steak gets expensive, they assume you'll buy hamburger instead, and they count that as no inflation. It's statistical manipulation designed to hide the truth. When you include all the tricks they use to understate inflation, the real number is probably double what they report, maybe more. So when they say inflation is 3%, your cost of living is probably rising 6 or 7%. When they say it's under control, it's actually accelerating. When they say they don't understand why prices are rising, they're lying. But here's what gives me hope. More people are starting to understand. The information is available. The truth is getting out. Young people especially are starting to question why they can't afford the same lifestyle their parents had. They're starting to ask the right questions. Why does everything cost more every year? Why do wages never seem to keep up? Why does it take 2 incomes to afford what 1 income bought in 1970? Why do you need a college degree to afford a house when your grandparents bought one working in a factory? The answer is always the same. Monetary inflation, currency debasement, government theft through the printing press. But understanding the problem is only the first step. You also need to understand the solution. And the solution isn't political. You can't vote your way out of this. The politicians who created this problem aren't going to fix it voluntarily. The solution is personal, individual. It's protecting yourself and your family by holding assets that maintain their value while currencies lose theirs. It's understanding that $1 saved today will buy less next year, and less the year after that, and building your financial plan around that mathematical certainty. It's recognizing that the biggest risk isn't market volatility. The biggest risk is currency destruction, and positioning yourself accordingly. Most importantly, it's spreading this understanding, teaching your children, educating your friends, making sure people understand what's being done to them and why. Because here's the final truth that everyone needs to understand. This monetary theft only works if people don't realize it's happening. If everyone understood that inflation is caused by money printing and that money printing is a choice and that there are alternatives, the whole system would change overnight. Politicians couldn't blame supply chains anymore. Central bankers couldn't pretend they don't control inflation. The public would demand sound money the same way they demand clean water or safe roads. But as long as people believe the lies, as long as they think inflation is some natural disaster that just happens, like earthquakes or hurricanes, the theft will continue. So let me leave you with this. Every time you hear someone blame inflation on anything other than monetary policy, you're hearing either ignorance or deception. And given how simple the real cause is and how well documented it is, you can probably guess which one. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. It was true when I said it in 1963. It's true today. It will be true in 2027 and 2030 and 2050. The only question is whether you'll protect yourself from it or whether you'll be one of its victims. I've given you the knowledge. What you do with it is up to you. Choose wisely. Your financial future depends on it. And remember, in a world where governments control the money supply, the only way to be truly free is to understand money better than they want you to. Think for yourself. Question everything they tell you about inflation, about monetary policy, about economics. Because the truth isn't complicated. It's just inconvenient for those in power. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Never forget that. But let me give you something more specific, something actionable, because understanding the problem without knowing the solution is just frustration. I want to tell you about 3 historical examples that prove everything I've been saying. 3 times when countries faced the exact situation we're in today, and how 2 of them solved it, while 1 didn't, and what happened to each. Example 1, Germany, 1923. The Weimar Republic was printing money to pay for World War I reparations and government spending. Sound familiar? By November 1923, it took 4.2 trillion marks to buy 1 US dollar. People brought wheelbarrows full of cash to buy bread. Children played with stacks of worthless banknotes. But here's what most people don't know. Germany didn't solve this through price controls or government intervention or blaming speculators. They solved it by doing exactly what I've been telling you. They stopped printing money. They created a new currency backed by real assets, and within months, inflation collapsed. The hyperinflation didn't end gradually, it ended suddenly, because once they stopped creating new money, there was no fuel for rising prices. Mathematical, predictable, inevitable. Example 2, Israel, 1985. For years they had inflation over 400% annually. The government was printing money to fund spending, just like today. The economy was collapsing. People were fleeing the country. But then they did something remarkable. They implemented what economists call a cold turkey approach. They stopped printing money overnight. They cut government spending. They eliminated price controls. And within 2 years, inflation fell from over 400% to under 20%. No gradual adjustment, no careful easing, just mathematical reality asserting itself once they stopped debasing the currency. Example 3, Zimbabwe, 2000s. Here's a cautionary tale. They tried everything except stopping the printing. Price controls, wage controls, blaming foreign conspiracies, arresting business owners for raising prices. By 2008, inflation reached 231 million% annually. They printed $100 trillion bills, literally, You can buy them on eBay now as souvenirs. The currency became so worthless that people used it as wallpaper because it was cheaper than buying actual wallpaper. What finally ended Zimbabwe's hyperinflation? They stopped using their own currency. People started using US dollars and South African rand instead. The printing press became irrelevant because people refused to accept the worthless money it produced. Do you see the pattern? Every hyperinflation in history ended the same way. Not through government intervention, not through price controls, not through blaming external factors, through stopping the creation of new money, always. But here's what I want you to understand about 2026 specifically. We're at a critical moment, a tipping point, and most people don't realize how quickly things could change. For the first time in 80 years, there are viable alternatives to government-controlled currencies. I'm talking about cryptocurrencies, specifically Bitcoin. Now, I wasn't alive when Bitcoin was created, but if I had been, I would have understood immediately what it represents. It's digital gold, a monetary system that no government can manipulate. No central bank can print more Bitcoin. No politician can debase it to fund spending. The supply is fixed by mathematics, not by political pressure. This is what I dreamed of for decades, a monetary system that puts control back in the hands of individuals instead of governments, a way to opt out of the inflation tax entirely. But here's what's fascinating. The same people who have been wrong about inflation for 60 years are now wrong about Bitcoin. They call it speculative. They call it risky. They warn people away from it. Meanwhile, countries like El Salvador have made it legal tender. Companies like MicroStrategy have put it on their balance sheets. Pension funds are buying it. Why? Because they understand what it really is. It's not a speculation. It's insurance against monetary debasement. When I was alive, the best protection against inflation was gold. Gold still works, but Bitcoin is gold for the digital age, transportable across borders, divisible into tiny fractions, verifiable by anyone with a computer, and most importantly, completely outside the control of governments and central banks. If you hold Bitcoin, you're protected from monetary inflation. Not because Bitcoin's price goes up, although it probably will as more people understand what it is, but because no one can create more of it to steal your wealth. This is the first time in human history that ordinary people have had access to truly sound money. Money that can't be printed, money that can't be debased, money that can't be controlled by politicians. But let me be clear about something. I'm not telling you to put everything into Bitcoin or gold or any single asset. I'm telling you to understand that holding government currency long-term is a guaranteed losing strategy. The mathematics are clear. The historical precedent is clear. The outcome is inevitable. So what's a reasonable person to do? Diversify your wealth across assets that can't be printed. Some gold, some Bitcoin, some shares in profitable businesses, some real estate, some commodities. The exact allocation doesn't matter as much as understanding the principle. Don't hold wealth in the form that governments can create more of. Hold wealth in forms that are scarce by nature or by mathematics. And here's something else that's crucial. Understand that what's happening now in 2026 is not temporary. It's not a phase that will pass once supply chains normalize or once geopolitical tensions ease. It's the inevitable result of decades of monetary expansion, and it's going to continue until governments are forced to stop printing money. That could happen next year if people wake up and demand sound money. It could happen in a decade if the currency collapse forces change. Or it could happen never if people never understand what's being done to them. But regardless of when it happens, the mathematics are working against anyone who holds depreciating currency. Every day you wait to protect yourself is another day your purchasing power is being stolen. Let me tell you what I would do if I were starting over today as a young person. Not investment advice. I'm an economist, not a financial advisor, but mathematical logic applied to monetary policy. I would spend no more than necessary. I would save as much as possible, and I would convert those savings into assets that governments cannot create more of. I would read everything I could about monetary history. I would understand what happened in Germany in 1923, in Hungary in 1946, in Zimbabwe in 2008. I would understand that it's happened before and it will happen again. I would ignore financial media that talks about inflation as if it's some mysterious force. I would ignore politicians who blame prices on everything except monetary policy. I would ignore economists who pretend not to understand the relationship between money supply and prices. And I would position myself to benefit from the mathematical certainty that currencies created by governments will lose value over time. This isn't speculation. This isn't a bet. This is arithmetic applied to monetary policy, as predictable as gravity, as reliable as mathematics itself. The only question is how long it takes people to figure this out. Some people will never figure it out. They'll hold government currency until it's worthless, wondering why their standard of living keeps declining despite working harder every year. Some people will figure it out too late. They'll understand the problem only after most of their wealth has been inflated away. But some people will figure it out now, while there's still time to position themselves correctly, while assets that protect against currency debasement are still available at reasonable prices. Which group will you be in? The mathematics don't care about your politics. They don't care about your opinions. They don't care about what you wish were true. Money created faster than production increases causes prices to rise. Always, everywhere, without exception. That's my final message, my last economic lesson. The most important thing any person can understand about money and government and the relationship between them. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. The people in power know this. They count on you not knowing it. Now you know it. What you do with that knowledge will determine your financial future. Choose wisely. The arithmetic is unforgiving to those who ignore it. And remember, economic truth doesn't change just because it's politically inconvenient. Think for yourself. Question the authorities, protect your wealth, and never, ever trust anyone who claims inflation is caused by anything other than printing money. Because now you know better. Now go protect yourself accordingly.